안녕하세요. 제 오랜 친구 데이비드 목사를 소개합니다. 그는 1980년 초에 2명의 한국 아이를 입양하여 아름다운 가정을 이루었습니다. 오늘은 그의 교회와 입양한 부모로서의 그의 마음을 들어보겠습니다. 오늘은 멜번에서 온 데이비드 친구를 소개합니다. David, can you introduce yourself briefly?
Hello, I'm David O'Brien. I live in Melbourne.
Welcome to Perth.
Thank you.
I think it's about 1987 we met, right?
Yeah, I think
First
so.
met.
Yes.
Yeah. She's a Debbie wife of David's wife. Right, so introduce yourself.
I'm Jenny, and I met David in Perth when I was about 22, and we lived here for 19 years or something, and then we went to Melbourne. So we come back regularly because we have family here.
Thank you. So, how big is your congregation? Which church?
Okay, Senior Pastor of Waverley Baptist Church in Melbourne.
Waverley Baptist Church.
Waverley Baptist Church, yes, it's in the Glen Waverley area, which is southeast of Melbourne, about 20 kilometres from the CBD. So we're a medium-sized church, 120 to 150 people on a Sunday morning, or we were until COVID.
Adults or including
That's adults.
adults? Oh,
Yeah.
quite big then.
So we
Reasonable
don't
size.
have a huge number of children because it's an older suburb and most of our congregation is over the age of 50, but we have a small number of younger families. Quite a lot of Chinese people have moved in and joined our congregation. That's good. But we are also surrounded by the mega churches of Melbourne. There are churches of 4,000 and 6,000 within a kilometre or two of where we're situated. So we're very much a family church, a church family where everybody knows each other, and our people are very heavily involved in lots of community organisations and community activities. If people want relationship and family, they come to a church like ours. And I know you can get that in any church, but if they want professional music and top quality performance in the arts area, then they probably go to one of the mega churches where you have paid people in those sorts of positions.
Can you tell us about your children?
Okay, back in the early 1980s, my wife and I discovered we couldn't have children, so we researched the whole topic of adoption. At that time we found the inter-country adoption program that was put on by the Korean government, and the Eastern Child Welfare Society had an agreement with the West Australian government. We were living in the West then, and so we applied for adoption, and over a few years we adopted first of all our daughter Sarah, and then 3 years later we returned to Korea and adopted our son Tim. Now, Sarah's currently 36 and Tim's 33, so they're no longer children, and they've grown up. Both of our children have a child of their own, so we have 2 grandchildren. William is just about to turn 8, and Isla is just 6 months.
6 months.
Our Father God, we thank you for friendships over many decades, and we praise you for the relationship we have together and for the relationship that we have with you through Jesus Christ. We thank you that you provide for all of our needs, and for the need for food, we praise you for this food. We ask your blessing on this meal, and we thank you for it in Jesus' name.
식당이 너무 시끄러워 식사 후 우리 집으로 이동하도록 하겠습니다. when you book your flight, there was no quarantine requirement in
No.
Western Australia.
That's right. we came.
But just a day before you arrived, right? Or 2 days before, was it?
Well, they found the cluster originated on December 21.
December 21.
Now, that means they discovered the first cases about the 25th or 26th, somewhere around there. So a few days before we came on the 29th.
29th.
They had discovered that there were a few cases. It ultimately went to about 21 cases, I think, in what they call the Black Rock cluster. But there were no outside cases and there was no community transmission and there was no need to lock down 16,000 people. But that's the way things work.
David, I'd like to hear about your experience or feeling while you're bringing up Korean children. What was the happy time while you're bringing up Korean children, or when was happiest?
I think the children were lovely when they were little. They were happy, very happy.
Yeah, I remember Timmy always smiling.
Yes,
You know.
yeah.
And Sarah used to laugh and find fun. Sarah
She was a joker.
was always making other people laugh and always made people happy. So in their primary years, they enjoyed school and they were delightful. Remember, we didn't really think of them as bringing up Korean children. They were just our children.
Oh, yeah.
And we just brought them up as our children. Now, we always tried to introduce them to Korean culture, to Korean cuisine, and we even took them back when we met you in Korea back, when was that?
1990 or 91.
1991, I think it was, yes, something like that. And so we certainly wanted them to honour and value their origins, the Korean culture. We encouraged them to learn Korean language, but as young Aussie kids, they weren't very interested in that. In fact, Debbie's learned a lot more Korean than they ever did. They were very personable, they were outgoing. Sarah in particular loved people. Tim loved sports and was very capable, very good hand-eye coordination. He loved his skateboard. He broke his wrist one time on his falling off his skateboard, as boys tend to do. So really that primary time was a very enjoyable time. We went on some nice holidays, took them around the country and different places. Yeah, the primary years were very good. When they hit adolescence, they had an identity crisis, really. That was hard for them to cope.
How did they cope, or how did you help them to cope with?
Well, all we could do with a lot of it was just by being steady and by being consistent in every way. Because there comes a time, most teenagers or most Australian teenagers go through an angry period. A lot of parents would say, you wait till your teenager tells you that they hate you. And that's quite common. And remember, although our children were Korean by birth, culturally they were very, very Australian. So for them, they had an extra weapon, and that weapon was, you're not my real parent. I don't have to do what you say. And so they rebelled somewhat, did some things that we perhaps weren't terribly happy with.
Was it the hardest time for you?
Probably not the hardest time. The hardest time was later because it really took them through to being about 25 to mature as adults. So the period between 18 to 25 was somewhat distressing and a little disappointing at times. We had some good times with them, but they certainly decided that they would do whatever they wanted to do after they turned 18, and they really got themselves into some difficulties we supported them without endorsing any things we didn't agree with, but we've maintained the relationship. And just recently we were talking to them, and Debbie had raised the fact that they had told us that we weren't their real parents, and it was Tim you were saying that to, and he was really shocked, and he said he has no recollection of ever saying that, and that as far as they're both concerned now, we are the parents that they always had, we're the parents who raised them. We recognise, of course, we're not their biological parents, and so there's not that genetic continuity, and that is always a challenge for adoptive children, because whatever component of your lifestyle is genetic doesn't match with theirs. When we contacted Sarah's mother, and Sarah's mother came out to Australia and visited us.
Birth mother you're talking
Her
about.
birth mother, yes. Yeah, her birth mother. And Sarah got to know her birth mother a little. We noticed that there were certain personality characteristics that even though they're in totally different cultures, speaking totally different languages, they actually had a large degree of similarity. Yeah, so that's the genetic carryover. So our main strategy, though...
Do they realize that? Both Sarah and her mother?
Don't know if her mother would have noticed or no, but
Or Sarah realized that?
I don't think she wanted to know.
She doesn't like to
She
know.
actually didn't really relate well to her mother. She couldn't speak the language, and at that stage she didn't really understand how her mother felt. And her mother was overcome at times, and Sarah said how one night she woke up and the mother was standing there in the room looking at her while she was sleeping, and that really freaked her out.
She just wanted to watch her
But
sleeping.
we learned that Sarah was taken away from her mother at birth. We knew that, but what we didn't know that Sarah's mother had never held her. She had never even laid eyes on her. So when we showed her the picture that we received of Sarah at 1 month of age, that she had never seen her daughter at that sort of age. She didn't see her at all. So that was very traumatic. Tim hasn't ever wanted to find his mother. We've encouraged him, but it's his choice.
But he has had his DNA done, and it is a possibility that he might need his parents.
That he may one day. Tim's DNA shows that he's 50% Japanese, or 49 roughly percent Japanese, which means that either one parent was Japanese.
How did you know that?
That's in his DNA. It
DNA test?
comes back. There's Mongolian DNA, which is the Korean, comes back as Mongolian.
Yes.
But Japanese is quite distinct. So he had a little bit of Chinese, a little bit of Vietnamese, mainly Mongolian and Japanese, about 49% each. So he could have one Japanese parent and one Korean parent, or it may be that both of his parents were 50-50, half Japanese, half Korean. So you don't know how those combinations come together.
After they realized their identity and they were adopted, they should understand that if they were not adopted, then they might have ended up living in small orphanage in Korea, their life may be miserable.
Yeah.
Don't they realize that?
They don't understand that. We've tried to tell them that they might have been cleaning floors on trains or something like that, but it just never really struck them. No.
They can't compute that, they can't comprehend it, because we are what they've always known. And you can tell them, and they might acknowledge it intellectually, but it's never been something that they've been able to grasp in their inner being, how blessed they have been.
So they take it as a granted.
Yes, they take it for granted largely. I mean, as we grow up with our families and our parents, we generally take that situation for granted.
Yes, that's right. Is it because you plant in a certain belief while you're growing them?
I don't know that we could claim that. We have our values and our beliefs, of course. We shared them. We shared values of honesty and integrity and faith and character and love and service and sacrifice and all those values, Christian values that we hold dear. And as I look at them now, some of those values they have really taken on board and are exhibiting. Not all, but certainly some, and I'm sure, yes, our upbringing has helped them and shaped them, but for them to understand what life might have been like if they hadn't been adopted, well, that's really outside their
imagination.
Yeah, their ability to think things through.
That's quite strange, because as a human being, mature person can imagine like that. If even ordinary people, they think about, if I choose that way, then my life would have been that way, like that. So we always thinking back in order to make a better decision in the future.